Hello, LinkedIn Live. Thanks for joining us for another session. It's been a while again, Lori. We had Chris Harrington join us for Exploration Tech, which was fantastic. If you haven't seen it, I highly
Yeah, it was great.
go and check that out. And looking forward to the conversation today. So my name is Jared Hackbart. I'm the Director of Sales and Marketing here at Brilliance. And I'm looking forward to talking about supporting B2B e-commerce on the non-technical roadblock side. Lori, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes. Hello, LinkedIn and our YouTube community too. We're excited to be chatting with you today. I am Lori McDonald. I started Brilliance a little more than 20 years ago. I went to school at Purdue in computer electrical engineering and ended up through an internship at NASA Johnson Space Center, where I worked as a flight controller for the space shuttle program. It was a lot of fun. I ended up meeting my husband there, who also was a flight controller at NASA. He eventually went to work for Rockwell Automation, and we ended up relocating to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, with a promotion that he had to Rockwell's headquarters to manage Rockwell's largest data warehouse. And I was trying to figure out what could be as cool as space. And so I decided to start a web development company. That was in 1998. And we have focused, developed a niche in working in the B2B e-commerce space. Grown as a company. We made the Inc. 5000 list last year. My husband left his job at Rockwell, and now he leads our development team. And so I'm really excited about the conversation we're having today about non-technical roadblocks for B2B e-commerce. I think it's interesting because we're in a very technical space, but there's certainly a lot of non-technical things that can get in the way.
Absolutely. So a couple housekeeping items. If you want to share where you're coming from, we'd love to hear from you. I'd also ask if you get a moment to follow us on LinkedIn. We're constantly working on producing as much content as we can to support. Primarily we target our niche, the manufacturers and distributors in the B2B space, but we've created a lot of good content that can relate both to retail and various other aspects of digital strategy. So let's jump into it. Well, I should also mention, if you have any questions, feel free to punch them into the chat, and we'll do our best to answer those as we go through our conversation today. Now, with that being said, let's jump into the topic at hand. So we have a couple different buckets, and I know, Lori, you said, and we titled it non-technical, and some of these items that we're going to talk about, there may be technical aspects to them, but really what we're talking about is everything that you need to consider as an organization outside of the implementation and how it relates to your e-commerce channel. And the first topic that I'd love for us to dive into a little bit further, or at least the first overarching bucket, is the idea of internal processes. So Lori, would you like to kick us off with this idea of pricing strategy and why it's important to make sure you've got that lined up before you go live with your new implementation?
Yeah, for sure. Well, and when we think about pricing, obviously there's a lot that goes into pricing strategy, and certainly in the B2B space, pricing can be really tricky from the standpoint that you often have different customers that get different prices. And in my experience from when we think about the things that are non-technical that can get in the way, part of what needs to happen and often is missing is a clear definition of how your pricing works today. Because really, to be strategic about what you want to do in the future, you first have to be able to be clear about what you're doing now. And in many organizations, especially if you haven't been selling online previously, the way pricing is stored and kept and managed may not be in a way that's easily defined or shared with a digital channel. And so really having clarity around how your pricing works. I know with one organization that we worked with many years back that was just moving into digital, their pricing, because of their sales reps, really managed how different accounts got what price, was stored in like a notes field. And so like that is technical, but it's also process because it's like how they go about managing pricing actually makes it more difficult for them to be strategic about how they're going to manage pricing. So really, I think it starts with, sorry, Jared, you were about to Go ahead.
No, it's great. I was going to mention, and we're going to touch on it a little bit in a little later here around the B2B e-commerce compensation side for sales.
Yeah.
But we also dove into, there's an article that we're going to be releasing soon, targeting early next week, that talks about B2B e-commerce compensation as a whole. But there's a concept within that article that talks about how you can be leveraging your e-commerce channel to drive certain sales through the website. So if you have a product line that you're looking to test, or if you have a product line that you're looking to move, whatever the reason may be, there's different and various ways that you can be leveraging your e-commerce channel for that. And part of that gets tied back into the idea of how you're pricing things differently for those certain product lines versus others. I know you're referencing the idea of different pricing for different customers and the complexity that comes around that. But I think this can play a component to that as well.
Yeah, definitely. And what that really raises for me, what I think about, when we think about process, is like, what internal processes do you have around how you're sharing goals, or like how you're communicating with your team? So even that you would be able, so that your team that's working with your digital site is going to know, that here's a product line that you might want to test out, or how are you communicating and strategizing around which product lines are the most profitable, and what things that you what things you're doing with your largest business strategy that you want to be leveraging as a part of your digital as well.
Absolutely. And I think that's a perfect segue into the next topic we had said we wanted to hit on around roles and responsibilities, specifically pertaining to the product management process. We had an Exploration Tech. It was a few months ago now, maybe it was earlier this year, with our director of product and projects, Eric Dingeldine, where we talked about roles and responsibilities and various pieces of that conversation were related to I'm forgetting the name of the structure.
The RASCI
Thank
framework.
You. The RASCI, yes, and how you can build out a RASCI and whatnot. But overall, I mean, I think it goes without saying, with an e-commerce, standing up a new e-commerce channel, whether it's new or not for you, having the right roles and responsibilities in place to support your growth and the execution is critical for the success of that site moving forward.
Yeah, definitely. And even naming when you're first getting into e-commerce, you may not necessarily know what all the roles and responsibilities are that you'll need. But even if you state your expectations of like, here's what we envision we're going to need, and here's who's going to be responsible for what, it's a living document that you can modify as you learn new things, that you have new roles that you're going to need, or the person you assign to it doesn't have enough time to do it. It gives you a starting point that you can adapt over time. I think the other thing when I think about product management process is that for many organizations, thinking about who's the person who updates product information, like what state, and when you think about digital, many times the information that you may have been gathering around your products may not be sufficient or for the experience that you want to provide on a digital site. So many times there's more work that's going to need to be done. And so like, are you going to have to involve more people in that process in order to really ensure you've got the great digital site that you want? And how do you make it easy for them? So that like, it's not, what you don't want to have happen is that you've got some people over in a department that just hand a bunch of files and information over to your IT team who's tasked with it. Like, how do you ensure that that you're hearing from them and understanding like what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, and make it easy for everybody to collaborate?
Absolutely. I mean, we always talk about empowering long-term success on a foundation of continued innovation. And how do you do that successfully? It's by having a product management process in place to ensure that you are not only taking the time to continue to invest in that strategy moving forward, but also ensuring that you're covering all your ground. So we have so much to hit, and I would love to continue to hit on
maybe we're taking too long.
roles and responsibilities.
Move us forward, Jared.
I'm gonna skip us ahead. As Lori and I were planning for this LinkedIn Live, we were talking about on the internal process side, and we really kind of kicked around whether or not this should fall into this bucket, but I think we landed and agreed that it was in the right spot, and it was around the idea of shipping process, and that we're not specifically talking about, or we're not talking about the integration into your e-commerce site and the shipping process. More so, we're talking about the different approach now that you need to take as an organization for shipping when leveraging an e-commerce channel.
Yeah, and so for many business customers, they traditionally, especially if they have large equipment, or products that are over 150 pounds or ship freight, or, you aren't estimating shipping when someone's placing an order. You're figuring out what it's going to cost to ship after someone places an order. And so then thinking about how will that translate into allowing people to place orders online is something that has to be defined in terms of like what are you going to attempt to have some type of a rate that is provided to people before they place the order or not, and thinking about are there changes that you make to the way that you currently fulfill to support your digital channel, or does your digital channel just need to flex to support the way that you're doing business currently? I think in a best case scenario, usually organizations are looking at how they change their processes in some respect to make it easier for customers to do business with them on the whole, improve that customer experience as a part of implementing digital.
I don't have much to add outside of that. I mean, you covered it well, and because we have so many other great pieces of content to hear here, I think I'm going to just move us forward.
Sounds good.
So we covered our internal processes bucket, and the next kind of bucket of items we wanted to touch on were around the idea of channel management. Often in conversations, I'm going to start with our second point here, but often in conversations, Lori, we find ourselves talking to organizations who haven't embraced e-commerce yet. They're looking to do that, and they are, one of their top concerns comes back to, as a manufacturer, if I'm going to establish an e-commerce channel, what do I do about my distributors? It's funny because often the distributors aren't thinking that. I think more so for them, it's a conversation of, can I get the manufacturer to invest in this or support my initiative around this? But specifically, I'd love to start with the idea of supporting a manufacturer and managing that channel conflict, and what our recommendation would be for how we handle something like that. Yeah.
Well, I think, and this was a topic we hit on a little bit with Chris Harrington in our last Exploration Tech, but I think that at a high level, the advice is that, like, you can't just ignore it. You can't like that. You can't just think, I think the answer of saying, well, we can't do digital commerce because it would upset our channel, I think that oversimplifies it. And I just don't think that's a reality for an organization. I think everyone needs to be looking at how they enable digital because their customers expect it and want it. And so I think the question is, how do you do it in a way that can be supportive of your distributors, or win-win? In some instances, you might be providing tools to your distributors to enable them to sell products online. You might be selling products at a higher price point than your distributors are, so that they still are able to compete in a way. You might be offering additional services that you might be offering customized products that your distributors don't. It really will depend on the scenario, but ideally, you're involving distributors in your conversation about your digital strategy. You're providing them tools to better sell your products, and just really enabling it to be win-win all around. And I think in general, it requires us all to be thinking about how do we have conversations with people to be figuring out, how do we help us all grow in the process.
Absolutely. And to your point, there are various ways you can tackle that topic. I think our biggest overall suggestion, you hinted toward it at the beginning when you referenced our conversation with Chris Harrington, but is just simply don't avoid it. Don't
Right.
push it aside, or don't let it become an excuse not to do it. Make sure that you take the necessary steps, you have the uncomfortable conversations that are going to drive some healthy conflict and hopefully land in a spot where everyone feels like, we can drive some additional revenue for both organizations, make it a mutually beneficial relationship for both organizations.
Exactly.
So another aspect of channel management that we often have conversations around is the idea of third-party e-commerce platforms like the Amazons, the Walmarts of the world. And people will come and say, well, either I'm currently doing this, or should I be currently doing this now that I am investing in my own e-commerce channel? What would you say to that person?
Yeah. Well, generally, I think third-party channels can be a good thing. I think that my advice is always like, don't let it be your only thing. Like it is a dangerous position to rely on Amazon as an example as your only digital channel for sales. And because, even though you can see success in that, Amazon can and will replace you in a heartbeat if something else comes along that works better for them. So I think using it as a part of your strategy, but not as your only strategy. And that would be true in general for third-party platforms on the whole. And I think, being aware of the fact that when you leverage third-party tools, thinking about who owns that customer. Amazon owns the customer when an order is placed through Amazon. So that limits your ability to develop that relationship with them. But also on the flip side, there can be some real advantages. They have a much wider audience of people that are logging in there to place orders. Amazon business is certainly growing. So I think, back to what you were saying earlier about, healthy conflict, like being like engaging, I wouldn't say like, don't walk away from it. Just go into it with your eyes wide open of like what it is, the risks involved. I think there are some great teams out there. We have some partners that really specialize in those third-party channels, making sure you're working with someone who knows those channels really well.
Yeah, and I think you nailed it. If you're not familiar yourself or comfortable, I would highly recommend finding a partner that can support you, that has the relations, that has the experience with specifically Amazon from our experience, because there are many facets to that relationship that it would be wise to have experience on your side. Yeah. And to your point, there's opportunity there for you. Clearly they have a wide reach, but you're going to sacrifice margin. And so if you can come up with ways that you can leverage both to drive success for your organization, that's ultimately the ideal path to take it down. And if you are interested in connecting with someone who could support you in that, you can reach out to us. We'd be happy to make the introduction to our strategic partner that is very talented in this space. Anything else that you would like to mention around channel management, Lori?
No, I think it was great.
All right. So my favorite piece of the conversation today is jumping into sales engagement. And so we often find ourselves maybe pushing's too harsh of a word, advocating for organizations to be leveraging their sales team when looking for adoption with their e-commerce platform. Primarily because, in the B2B space, it can be used as a sales tool. They have the direct access to clients that you're hoping to get set up on the platform. If your sales team embraces it and they're out advocating for it, you have a much higher likelihood of success overall, and quick, and much more quickly than just expecting people to eventually migrate their way through some sort of strategic email campaign or however you may announce a new site. Another facets of sales team adoption, or why it is that we advocate for organizations to leverage their sales team to support them on this front?
Yeah, well, I mean, when I think about the irony is that I think many organizations stay away from digital commerce because of fears around, or maybe it's not, maybe fear isn't the right word. Like it's kind of this idea that, that's not the way we have grown our business and is through our sales team. And there's just a great respect, which is wonderful and should be true of like for their sales team and how their sales team works, and almost sees digital as competition for their sales team, as something that would like it's your sales team or your digital commerce. And so I think when we think about sales team adoption, it's really reframing that mindset to be like, no, it's not like either or. This is for your sales team. This is going to be something that's going to make their lives easier. This is going to help them do their job better. This is going to help them spend less time on things that are an annoyance and keep them from doing the more effective things. And to your point, Jared, and also like as there's a realization of those things being true, also your sales team are the most effective advocates. Like if you get that right, if you can ensure that your sales team feels empowered by what you're doing with your digital strategy, they're the best people to encourage your customers to be using it. If you launch your digital commerce site and you don't have your sales team on board, your ability to get your existing customers to use it is going to be really limited.
Absolutely. Which is a way into, all right, how do we get our sales team to support the e-commerce channel, and what's in it for them? And so, as I mentioned earlier in the conversation, we have a new resource that will be hitting the Brilliance resources page early next week, and we'll be promoting it on LinkedIn and other social channels as well. But it's about the idea of B2B e-commerce compensation. How are you compensating your sales team out for the sales that are coming through the e-commerce channel, and various strategies and ways that you can be leveraging that idea to support the e-commerce piece. The reason why we created it, obviously, is because we get quite a few questions from existing customers, from prospects around this topic, and it's definitely a highly debated topic on how it should be handled. I specifically, well, I think this probably came from you, Lori. The easiest path to supporting your sales team, and easiest path for management, at least, as well, when it comes to handling the compensation, is just compensate them for everything that comes through the e-commerce site.
Yeah. Yes.
Why not?
Right. And I think the benefit of compensating your sales team for the things that come from the e-commerce site is that certainly what you don't want to do is create a disincentive, right? You don't want your sales team to feel like, well, that your sales team would be discouraging people from using the e-commerce site because, they're not going to get compensated for it. So really thinking through implications to how you handle sales compensation, and recognizing in some ways, it's just a different path of placing an order. Like your sales team today filling out a paper order that they're faxing in? Hopefully not. but it's a different path to placing an order that enables that process to be more efficient, more accurate, for it to get fulfilled faster. And certainly you want to think about how you involve your sales team I think where the challenge comes in for a lot of business owners is then, or maybe management teams is, what happens to the orders that we're an existing customer, when they're new customers and they come into the e-commerce site, what then? What do we do then? And how do we divide that up? I think that's where there are challenges. So, but I think also opportunities, and I know, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. You could argue both sides, right? Leadership would probably sit there and argue and say, why would we give them compensation for a sale that they had to do nothing for? They essentially are getting free money out of it. You could totally argue that. I would argue, on the other hand, and say they're the ones who promoted this organization to set themselves up in the e-commerce channel and to leverage it so they could focus on higher dollar items and drive more business for your organization at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So we definitely touch on a few different ideas and strategies and some more thought behind how you can approach this, because obviously this isn't a cookie cutter idea. There's various ways you can tackle it, and each organization certainly has their own complexities when it comes to margins and products and what makes the most sense for them. So we'd love to get your feedback once that goes out, as well as handle any questions. Perhaps we'll have another LinkedIn live session once that goes live.
Yeah, that would be great. I know it's, to your point, Jared, it's something that we frequently get questions about, and I think it's obviously on a lot of people's minds. So I look forward to hearing feedback once we get it out there.
Absolutely. Well, here I was all concerned that we weren't going to get to all the topics that we had hit, and we end up cruising through the last bit here. Lori, is there anything you'd like to add about our topic today, non-technical roadblocks?
Yeah, I think that at a high level, what I think the most successful organizations are doing when they look at digital commerce is to recognize that it's an extension of their overall business, that it's not just like a marketing effort, but it really touches holistically on their entire organization. So as you think about, how are you going to be successful, what's important to recognize is that it really is something that needs broader organizational commitment and buy-in than just your IT and marketing departments, which is why when we talk about these things around like strategy and process and sales engagement, really what we're talking about is the involvement of the many different roles within an organization into that effort, and defining how this is a part of your larger business strategy. So in some ways, I think that's just a mindset of an understanding. And I think the more organizations can do to be thoughtful about how digital plays a role in everything they're doing, the more successful they'll be.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us for LinkedIn Live here today. If you have additional questions or you'd like to connect, discuss any of these topics in more detail, you can connect directly with Lori or myself on LinkedIn here, and we'd be happy to set up a conversation. All right. In the coming weeks here, we've got a few new exploration texts that you're going to see, which you can keep your eyes out for that. And then, I'm sure we'll have some additional LinkedIn Lives. We have not decided on topics yet, but we'll have that figured out soon. Thanks for your time, everybody.
Yeah, thanks.